Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Sipping with Staff. Thank you so much to everybody that was flexible with us and decided to wait to tune in today to this very, I think, exciting episode I've been looking forward to for two particular reasons. One is I get to introduce my colleague Gio, who many of you have probably seen at curbside but have not talked to in the store yet. I would say one of my highlights of 2020 so far, Gio, is having you, who is one of our longtime customers that we love geeking out with, now join us. So I get to geek out with you every single day. So it's awesome.
You're telling me.
I mean, it's been a bright spot. And secondly, you chose to pick sake, which, you know, everybody who has come into the Hollywood store, I know, has probably talked to Diana about sake and her passion. And I'm just so excited that we have somebody else as equally passionate, because even before you were with us on a colleague level, you would come in and geek out about sake with us.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to hear about what you brought to show us and, you know, hear a little bit about your background and you, so we can introduce you to everybody tuning in today.
Hello again, everybody.
Yeah. So, let's see here. Where did I want to start? Oh, I just want to ask, Gio, how did you get into sake?
Yeah. Kind of in a sort of similar way I think most people get into anything. I wandered into a store one day and said, what's all this stuff? And eventually somebody told me. No, but I used to live up in Oakland, and there's a really great shop up there called Umami Mart. Shout out to Umami Mart. They often bring a lot of the sakes in themselves, importing into America. But they just did a really good job of sitting down and explaining to me what the differences were, and they offered a lot of classes. So they offered like some pairings between different sake producers coming around and having dinners and explanation. And so I got to understand what the classification system was, taste different grades of sake, and just kind of, you know, really enjoyed it from that perspective. So that's what really got me into it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I think like having something like that, I know here we have tastings with Carrie-san that everybody likes to look forward to. Did you ever go to one of those?
No, I never did. I should have.
Well, you know what? You're going to really enjoy it when it comes to
Yeah, I am, actually.
But I just think sake, from my perspective, sometimes can be, there's just so much going on.
Yeah.
That it's sometimes, I think, a little overwhelming for everybody. I would say even people in the wine community sometimes. I know a lot of people have been trying to take sake courses with WSET to try and diversify it. I know sake is incredibly food friendly, which is a great asset to a lot of restaurants to add those to their menus. But to have somebody go over the classes and say, you know, the differences between like what is Naba, what is Genshu, you know, what is all these different things, Junmai. And I'm hoping to clear up some of that today with some of the things that you picked. So, Gio, why don't you tell me a little bit, just a quick overview of like what you decided to pick, and we can go a little more in the detail. And if anybody has any questions watching, we would love to answer some of your questions if possible, whether it's about sake or things in the store, or, you know, questions for Gio himself, so you can get to know him a little better. But we're here. So, do you want to maybe start with the first one that you picked here?
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to give a brief overview of the sakes I picked. I wanted to pick something that's a little bit more approachable on the price point end. Sake can be a little expensive. It's not impossible to find a great bottle for under $20, but typically you're going to be spending anywhere from $20 to $30. And so I've got, the first one here is a Nama Genshu style sake. It retails for $38.99, and kind of the really special thing about this Nama Genshu is it's an unpasteurized style of sake. So it's something that you would get and receive cold. You would always keep it cold. It's different from these in that it is perishable. But it is something that is one of the most impressive parts about it is it is undiluted. So when you're drinking it, you're going to be drinking it closer to the sake regular alcohol volume, which is around 20%. So because of that, it can take up, you know, much more of a battle with food, you know, like you've
very
got
fresh, I'm assuming, too.
Very fresh. You'll get a lot more funky, fruity flavors from it too, because you're not pasteurizing away a lot of those flavors.
Kind of like a raw sort of thing.
Yeah, it's essentially a raw sake, you know. So not all sakes are pasteurized. Most of them are, because it helps to preserve them a lot longer. And it makes for a little bit better situations in the volatility of moving sake around the world. You know, as you can imagine, all sake comes from Japan. Sake actually in Japanese just means alcohol. So interestingly, sake is a big broad thing in Japan. What we're talking about is Japanese style sake or Nihon sake. So Nama Genshu, to get back to the point, is a little bit fresher style. Can pair up with like roasted meats, sort of mushrooms and grilled things. Somebody actually for this one recommended buffalo fried chicken wings.
Buffalo?
Ranch. Yeah.
That'd be out for the Naba Shoten.
Yeah, for this
Naba
guy right
Shoten,
here, for this Minato Harbor sake. It's made out and around Kyoto, so you've got different style. I'm sorry, not Kyoto, Akita, which is in the very northwest of Japan. So out there, you're gonna have a lot of snow. You're gonna have a lot of water coming through. The water's gonna be very pure, and you're gonna have a lot of sea influence. So Japanese sakes tend to be different between the land and the sea. They tend to have a little bit more of an influence of the ocean when they're closer to the ocean and the brewery there. But this one in particular is special just because of all the ways that it can battle with the food, I think.
Yeah.
You know, of that fresh style.
And I think this is also a great example to kind of maybe talk about something similar as you're mentioning influence of the sea and the mountains.
Yeah.
The local yeast that is in the actual brewery plays a very important factor, as well as it's a very local thing for each area. Like you mentioned, it comes from this particular area. I know that this producer uses local rice, which plays a factor, and the water that they use is from the what is it? Omono River, which also gives it its distinct style, because water plays such an important factor in making sake as well.
Yeah, sake it's more complex than wine. There's some steps that we'll get to and how it's brewed exactly, but the water and the rice are the most important factors. The koji and the yeast make it into sake, but essentially it's just the marriage of water and rice. So what you're getting sometimes can be a pure form, can be a ethereal form, or it can be a funky sort of interesting form, but you can get lots of different styles from basic ingredients. It's almost like beer in that respect. Like you can go all over the place with it. So it lends itself to lots of different styles.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
So chicken wings or hearty meats will go with this very umami-rich style?
If I were doing Japanese food, I'd be doing like yakitori grill. I'd be doing like really strong, maybe like a big bowl of ramen, lots of fat in it. If I were doing sort of, there's a phrase in Japanese, I'm not going to say it in Japanese because I would butcher it, but essentially, sake doesn't fight with food. It doesn't pick its battles with food. It'll sort of harmoniously go along with everything. We're just not used to pairing it that way in the West. So kind of, along your point, something a little stronger for this. When I think of a younger, fresher sake or something with more interest to it, you can pair it with foods that are a little bit more, I guess, stronger in flavor. So where you might have a Bordeaux with strong flavor, you might pair that with strong flavor. This sort of younger, sort of fresher style sake will be the one with the strong flavor that you're pairing with the strong food. When you tend to be a little bit more expensive with the sake, you're getting a lot more like delicate flavors that you want to pair with more delicate foods.
And that would kind of segue, I think, really good into this, the Taka Noble Arrow from Tokubetsu, which is the Tokubetsu Jumai, which I found out just translates to special pure.
Yeah. So the kind of key word to pull out there is Junmai. So Junmai means that it's specifically a sake made with just rice, water, koji, and yeast.
So pure,
Pure.
Love it.
Tokubetsu means special, which is, without getting too far into the classifications and sort of the rice milling of it all, it means a sort of higher attention to the rice milling and a little bit more delicate in flavor. So we're kind of getting up there.
Higher attention to detail.
Exactly, yeah.
Which makes sense because you were telling me that this master brewer, Takashiro, he used to make wine in Burgundy, in Chablis of all, which can, be some of the most delicate or powerful styles. So it's like that same attention to details going into this bottle, which I thought was insanely cool. Yeah,
so kind of something to know about Japanese sake makers is it's very much a family tradition. You'll have in some of the older sake houses, 10, 20, 30 generations of people who were passed down from father to son, and they're then the sake or toji master sake brewer. So what's interesting about this one is, like you said, Takahiro went to Chablis and learned some of the winemaking out there, but then came back as the fourth generation sake maker to his family and sort of incorporated, it's not exactly the same, sake and Chablis are going to be very different, but he's incorporated some of the elements of terroir and using the limestone in the mountains that, filter down to the rice to sort of get more expressiveness in sake and sort of open it up to different things.
Yeah, and compared to the other one that had maybe like more stronger umami and bolder flavors, this one has like a little more like citrus and melon.
A lot more, yeah.
Could you serve this hot or cold, Gio?
So you would typically, a lot of sakes want to be served slightly chilled, so I would recommend it sort of actually around the same temperature you might serve a red wine. Sort of slightly out of the cellar, maybe around 65, 70 degrees. The sort of archetype of going to a sake restaurant and having that hot sake delivered to you. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty of great sake, high quality sake that you would serve hot, but a lot of that comes from sort of lower quality sake that flooded the American market in the 80s and 90s. That, you know, when you served it a little hot, maybe you couldn't taste that there wasn't any nuance. You could sort of be swept up in the magic of eating this new thing called sushi, having sake, which who knows what sake is, and sort of sharing in the experience without thinking too hard about how astringent the sake might be or how much alcohol is actually in there because it was hot.
That's true. But it did open the door for producers like this to come in later, which I think is great because now you have places like you mentioned, Oakland and the SKNL that carry.
Yeah.
I think we carry quite a dramatic amount of sake.
We have a great selection of sake. David, our spirits buyer, really helps to bring in a lot of cool sakes, and so when I'm putting them away, it's sort of like, oh, where is this from, you know? And often, so what we have is one of our distributors called World of Sake. These guys here, they actually will specialize in one sake from one province. So they'll only buy one sake from each prefecture around Japan.
Very cool.
So they'll have, you know, I'm not sure if we carry all of it right now, but at certain times we'll have different prefectures showing what their sakes can do. And, you know, if you've seen a picture of Japan, it's a very long country.
Oh, yeah.
So
it's like California.
It's like California, and you know that wine coming from Santa Rita Hills could have some similarity to Sonoma, but they're obviously going to be very different in sort of climate and sort of the terroir that's coming around, you know, so it's super interesting.
So with a sake that's going to be like a little more delicate here, more pure, a little brighter in acidity, what would traditionally go with this usually, and what would you pair with it? Yeah,
so acidity is kind of an important part of sake. It plays a factor in how much of the residual sugar you'll taste. So most sakes are actually quite dry. A lot of, in the process of fermenting, there's a lot of the sugar that was in the rice has actually been turned into alcohol. So when you are tasting a sort of sweeter sake, it tends to be one with a little bit higher acidity. Sort of bring out that sugar. They play with that a lot in wine.
Yes.
I think that's why Takahiro does such a great job with it, is he really understands that nuance of acidity, sugar, backbone, structure. So with this kind of wine, with the higher acidity, a little bit more taste of sugar in it and a lot more volatile vapors, you can get something to be a little bit more delicate. Because you don't want to mask that delicate flavor that's coming out. You want something to accentuate it. I'm thinking something like a poached fish, or maybe like oil poached fish or shrimp if you guys have never done that. Low and slow in the oven with lots of oil to cover it. Comes out really tender, really nicely like flavored and perfumed.
So pure food with pure sake.
I think so. I think that's...
I love that.
Yeah, that's how you should definitely see it. And, you know, especially when you can get a Tokubetsu and it says special in the name, you can feel a little special drinking it.
I love that. And, you know, I think it's great, too, because even though this, I would say, is a very special sake, it's still under $40.
It's still under $40, and it's got...
33, right?
Yeah, and it's got 15% alcohol, so, you know, it's like drinking a new Napa Red, you know. If you drink it yourself, you're going to be a little loose. But sharing it with friends in smaller portions is sort of what the sake bottle is all about. And did you know, Shelby, that you don't pour your own sake?
Oh, yes, I do.
Okay,
I actually made that faux pas.
Yeah. So you don't pour your own sake. In Japan and in Japanese restaurants, you always want to be pouring for your friend.
Yes, yes.
And if your friend has an empty sake glass and you haven't poured them, you're a bad friend.
I'll never be a bad friend to you, Gio.
Never, Shelby.
So, lastly, I've never seen a sake this color. I'm a huge fan of the Tamagawa brewery, the time machine, just because we had the master brewer, who's very special in his own way. His name's Philip Harper, and he's the first immigrant to be a master brewer in Japan for sake.
It's a big deal.
Huge deal. And I was just so blown away by the lineup that we tasted, so I was super excited to see that you picked the time machine by him.
Yeah. I wanted something to sort of be very interesting and different. So it's definitely the one, I think, in our lineup currently that kind of presents the most interest. It's unlike a sake it's definitely not anything like these two sakes, and I wish I knew more about amber style sake, but this recipe's from 1712, and this master brewer, who you said is not Japanese.
He's English.
He's English, yeah, and like I said, sake breweries get passed down through families,
Yes.
so, this is very atypical, but he's been able to sort of break some of the bonds of Japanese tradition. Japanese are great about marrying modern with tradition. They have a lot of beautiful styles that they've expressed in many different things, where it is a beautiful marriage of tradition and new, but sake tends to be very traditional.
I think even though he's maybe like bending the mold a little, it felt like when I met him, he was still very big on honoring the tradition of it at the same time. Exactly.
If you're going to be taken seriously, and obviously he has been taken seriously, it is always with a nod to tradition. And I mean, this is from 1712, where the recipe was from. But to kind of describe this sake is it's got a very heavy sort of molasses smell, very so you can taste that you can smell that it's going to be very sweet. But then when you really get into it, you're like, what is that? Is that soy sauce? Is that sort of a
very
rich
umami?
Yeah, it's a very rich, salty, umami flavored sake. So you can pair it with, I've read ice cream, cake, chocolate cake. You can pair it with these things that are sweet because it's got the sweetness to combat that and a lot of acidity. But then you're going to get something, just like adding a little bit of salt to a chocolate chip cookie, you're going to get some of that saltiness back when you have this with those sweet things. So it's a really interesting, it'll kind of open up a lot of that sweet dessert stuff that you're having.
I love that.
Yeah, but, you can also have it with salty cheeses, you can have it with good charcuterie, with...
What about eel?
You could probably do it with eel, yeah, with grilled eel. I think, because this is a strong sort of flavor, so again, you can kind of combine it with those strong flavors like in most sakes. But yeah, he's a very interesting brewer, and I'm hoping we get more. We do have a lot of his stuff. Tamagawa is, we have a lot of their stuff, so definitely check out more of their things.
And again, this is, if you ever want to try an amber sake like this is only $25, right? Yeah,
it's $25. It's a little bit on the no, it's only 14 to 15%, so you can definitely pair it as an aperitif or a dessert wine, and it works great for that.
Fantastic. Does anybody have any questions for Gio about the sakes that he picked today, or any other questions regarding sake? Doesn't look like it. We've had a great turnout for your first your first little thing. How are we doing on time here, Gio?
I think we're pretty good. We got another 10 minutes to go.
Fantastic. I've always been sort of mystified by sake, especially with how great it goes with food. I think one of my most personal eye-opening experiences for a tasting. What is that on the shelf? Oh, shelf life question.
Yeah. So it's a great question, actually.
Yeah.
You definitely want to finish sake as soon as you open. Not as soon as you can is sort of the best way to see it.
Kind of like a wine.
Kind of like a wine. It's not that it'll go bad. It is high enough alcohol that it'll maintain, but you'll start to lose a lot of that perfume. So while a Naba Genshu might not lose as much of it as quickly, something like this, which has very sort of ethereal flavors, will lose that quickly. Like once you start introducing air into here, you're starting to set. Yeah, you're setting a timer. But don't get me wrong, I've had sake after a week. You always want to keep it in the fridge. Once opened, technically, most sakes want to be in fridges. Naba Genshus need to be in fridges.
Just because it's unpasteurized.
It's unpasteurized, exactly. And you'll start to develop off flavors if you don't refrigerate it. Yeah.
Can't have that in good food.
Oh, no.
We have another question that came in here. So Gio, someone's asking, what determines the flavor more? Where the rice is grown or where the sake is brewed? Oh,
definitely where the sake is brewed. But that's a hard question.
That's so hard.
Yeah, the sake, that was a great question by whoever asked that. The sake is really influenced by the rice. It is, like I said, the main important ingredient. But the way you treat the rice afterwards is probably even more important. So you guys can't see this, and I'm sorry that it's not in color, but essentially, when you take rice to make sake,
the amount of milling.
There's a really important step in the milling. So you can't just take, brown rice and throw it into water and throw some yeast in there and Koji and call it sake. What you need to do is to hull off the exterior of the rice until exposing the interior starchy kernel. So the outside will have a lot of proteins, it'll have a lot of things that will give off flavors to the sake.
Once you starch for alcohol.
Yeah,
flavor.
Starch is the contributor to alcohol. So you need the starch. but you don't need the outside as much. Now, of course, the more you mill in the rice, the less rice you have.
Mm-hmm.
The milling is expensive, but the more rice you'll need to have initially. If you're milling 50% of it off, you need twice as much rice. So the different levels of sake, names like Daiginjo or Ginjo, they're going to be relative levels of how much of the rice was milled off in the process.
Mm-hmm.
So once you get past the milling, then you have the preparing of the sake. You have this process of introducing koji. Now, koji, if you guys know what miso is, and a lot of people know what fermentation is these days, but miso is a really important sort of koji ferment. Koji is a fungus.
Yeah,
It's
a mold.
It's a mold, sorry.
Aspergillus. Oh, I used to know because when I bought it.
Yeah, she's great. And yeah, it's a mold, and so it's naturally occurring, but in certain scenarios, you can encourage it to grow really well.
Mm-hmm.
And what that'll do is it'll convert the starch into refinable sugars that you then introduce the yeast in. So there's a whole process, and it's really elaborate with sake making. But definitely, to answer the question, the sake making is the most important contributor to what the sake tastes like.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I feel like I've learned so much from sake today, and thank you for picking this topic and enlightening us a little more. For anybody that is curious about sake, I think we have a great diverse lineup here at K&L. If you ever are curious and wanting to try supporting a local restaurant and picking up a sake to pair in the meantime while we're still in shutdown, I think is a fun way to change up a Friday night or something.
Yeah, and supermarket sushi never tasted better than with good sake, in my opinion. But
fancy and kind of fancy.
And kind of fancy,
But I think what's so great about sake too is that there's such a push out there to give people information so they can learn. So even if you just pick something blindly, you can always just type in a couple terms or even type in the thing, and you can get things as intense as I saw, like tasting notes for the first sake that you showed online, which I think helps demystify a lot of it to help maybe explore and expand people's knowledge in food and besides just food and wine, food and sake.
Yeah. No, I definitely know that when I go to Burgundy and I start seeing all those vineyard names, I start to feel a little lost and like I don't know what is the best, and you definitely want resources for that. So K&L has great employees that I wish you guys could come and see, but one day soon, hopefully you will again. So you could learn different things about the sake, but yeah, definitely online gets you information like the type of rice, the growing regions. There's some great prefectures that make some of the best sake, and you can find those things out, maybe just by the prefecture. So you're doing a similar thing as picking out a Burgundy. I want Burgundy Chablis, you're doing that same sort of thing. But know that in Japan, like I said, the making of the sake is almost the most important part.
Yes.
So you can go all over Japan and get great sake.
Yeah, and I honestly think that sometimes sake is the better pairing for certain foods, even if it's not Japanese food. One of my most eye-opening pairings was someone did a side-by-side of beef tartare, and then a classic pairing of a Shoten de Pop style wine.
Yeah.
And then I can't remember the sake, unfortunately, but it had a creaminess to it.
Okay.
That just the pairing with the Shoten de Pop was very good.
I'm sure, yeah.
But then with the sake, it was like otherworldly.
And I think if I could guess, it's the koji introduces essentially forms of amino acids that make up MSG. So, if you're afraid of MSG,
not a scary
close
thing.
your ears. It's not. But no, MSG is common in, Parmesan rind. It's common in beef. It's common in, you can find it in tomatoes. It's in everything. It's just
linked to that umami.
It is that umami taste. And the Japanese, of course, that's where the name umami comes from. So they've had a long relationship with this flavor, and they consider it a flavor. They're like salty, sweet umami. It's there. I think most
many
people,
chefs would say that too.
Most people are doing
like
that now too.
Now.
But the Japanese were at it from the beginning. They were like, hey, this is what it is. We've got this alcohol, which again, sake means alcohol, but this particular kind of sake or alcohol is something that goes really well with their food. And they've discovered that and honored it for many centuries now.
All right, yeah. Well, I love that we went through a little bit of the lineup of the long tradition of sake making here in Japan. And for anybody curious to try, please try some of our sakes that we have on our website. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us still via email. If you go on to our company.
It's a bit of a journey, but you can find out in our About page. You can go through the stores and find our names.
And then send us emails if you have any questions about wines, sakes, anything of the sort. I know the holidays are coming up, maybe be that cool person and bring a sake home for Thanksgiving this year.
It'll go with everything. Definitely with turkey. I mean, I think,
Now my favorite holiday's coming
Or
up.
with your pumpkin pie.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on today, Gio. And stay tuned next week for our lineup getting ready for the holidays, and some of our buyers are going to be joining us and telling us some of their picks for the holiday season. Until then, have a great week, everyone.
See ya. Nice to meet you.
Gio, that was phenomenal.
Heck yeah, dude.
That was like one of my favorite episodes.
Nice.
Hell yeah.